This podcast is brought to you by the AlmaMAC and Scientific Canada. It was recorded on the traditional territories shared between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. Enjoy. I feel like I just butchered that again, even though
That's close enough.
we just had the conversation. Okay.
My research on light adaptation in the fish right now.
I'm sitting in a kiddie pool, actually. It's quite nice,
Oh, that would be great.
but it's
man.
not very professional. As they say. All right, hello everybody, and welcome back to the show. Welcome to the AlmaMAC. I'm your host for this week, Adam, and I'm with your other host, Sawayra.
Sawayra. We said that in unison, so we kind of lucked out there.
Yeah, perfect. So haven't had both of us on in a little while. You've been very, very busy, and I think that's going to be the topic for this week. So what have you been busy with? Where have you been?
Yeah, Adam, I haven't made those sweet bio changes yet, but for the past several weeks, I was doing my comprehensive examinations and I passed. I successfully passed.
Congratulations. Yes.
Thank you.
So that must be a big load off your conscience and off your brain.
Yes. Yeah. You know, when you start the process, you think like, oh, for sure, like you're going to work on other things in the background because like, how can you focus on one thing for just several weeks? But honestly, for me, like that's the only thing I could do for those months. So definitely feels nice to have that behind me and have that milestone achieved.
Yeah. So you, as we've discussed before, you're in a PhD program, PhD MD program. And I think we've talked about it a little bit on the podcast before, but the whole concept of comprehensive exams for a PhD might be a bit foreign to some. So very briefly, it's just a big stressful test, right? And sort of at the first half of a PhD program. And
Yeah.
what's the goal is basically to see if you belong in the program, I guess, in rough terms.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I like to think it comes kind of like halfway between your PhD. So that's also a cool milestone to achieve.
Mhm.
And it essentially just tests your breadth and depth of a knowledge of a chosen topic and your ability to communicate on that topic. So I know we were talking in the little pre-interview how comprehensive exams, they differ between degrees, programs, universities. But yeah, essentially that's the crux of it.
Yeah. So for you, your comprehensive exam is of course going to be very different from what my comprehensive exam was because we're from very different, we do very different research, but so comprehensive is going to mean something different for you. What it was included in your comprehensive topics? Everything that has to do with every human body part? Or
Thankfully, no, I lucked out in that case, no. So it consisted of 3 parts. So one was a 10-page written grant proposal on a research topic that we chose. And that topic had to be conceptually and methodologically different from our own thesis topic. And then the second part was giving a 20-minute presentation on our grant. And then the third part is your wonderful Q&A where your committee members ask you questions about the grant and then generally about the literature.
that's interesting. The forcing it into the framework of a grant proposal, that was different compared to mine. Ours was just sort of present your thesis up to this point, and then you get into the Q&A session. But getting some real hands-on grant writing experience is probably pretty good. Was there like a specific grant format that you were writing for? Like, was it a model of some like Canadian granting agency type simulation, or was it a generic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was the former. So it was a CIHR style grant. Okay. And for my topic, I chose to design a randomized control trial. So I had to use the CIHR headings for RCT grants. So yeah, I agree with you. It was very nice to get some hands-on experience, like writing a grant without actually having to submit it and like be dejected and rejected once you don't get funded. But there's also like a lot of like reflecting and learning that took place as I was writing the grant, because you're realizing like, okay, maybe my study isn't the best. Like, okay, maybe like this is not the best way to tackle the topic that I was studying, but you just keep pushing forward. But yeah, that was, I found that helpful. I agree with you. I found it helpful just to get some experience, because that's hopefully what we want to do as researchers.
Yeah. Get that money to answer your questions. And I guess maybe one of the hidden challenges of writing this grant is really like contextualizing your question into the field as a whole. So maybe that's like a little backdoor piece of experience that they're forcing on you to really know your field. If you have to know your field to write a proper grant, I would imagine. So did they sort of question you on that aspect as well, like specifics of your grant proposal and then also context questions?
Yes, exactly. So the Q&A was exactly that. So it was both on my grant and then just general questions about the literature. So obviously, when I was writing the grant, I had to do a systematic review of the literature to see what studies had been published on the topic that I was doing. Mm-hmm. And that's another thing I learned, because I chose a topic that I don't really know anything about. And I don't think I would recommend that for anybody that's listening. Don't do that. Don't do that.
Ambitious.
Yeah. So that was kind of a struggle for me, because even though the topic was so interesting to me, it was just hard to learn kind of like decades worth of research and then all the like little nitty-gritty aspects that accompany it. So, but thankfully the questions were broad enough that I was able to answer them. So that was good. But yeah, it's kind of both styles of questions. So you have to be prepared in that aspect.
That makes sense. Could you give us a little taste of what your grant proposal was about? Is this something that you feel like you might come back to later in your career? Is it something that you're very passionate about, or was it this sort of I'm going to pick a topic that seems kind of cool and see where it goes?
Yeah, you know, Adam, I think maybe it was probably a combination of both. So it stemmed out of interest. So my topic was adapting and testing a trans diagnostic intervention for mental health problems among low-income pregnant women. Bit of a mouthful. Can give some background on that. So trans diagnostic. So that's basically treatments that target multiple mental health problems by targeting the core neural processes that underpin those mental health problems.
Okay.
And the reason that trans diagnostic interventions are promising is because people usually don't present with a single mental health problem. So people don't just present with depression or just anxiety. They're often comorbid or co-occur. So that's the benefit of trans diagnostic interventions. It's like, great, rather than giving a therapy for this and a therapy for that, just it's a one size fits all solution. Obviously, it's not as simple as that, but that's the idea of trans diagnostic. And I chose to do it. So that was the interest aspect, because I had a few months prior, I had read a paper on trans diagnostic interventions and the idea that there are like combined processes between mental disorders rather than like categorizing them all separately. So that kind of piqued my interest. And then in terms of what I hope to do in the future, so I am interested in working with populations facing disadvantage, including low-income populations. And so that's why I chose that population for my study. And low-income pregnant women are also more likely to present with comorbidities, so the co-occurrence of mental health problems, as compared to their more affluent peers. So it kind of all worked out as I was like studying and learning, like things were slowly coming together. Mm-hmm. So that I was fortunate in that sense. So that's what my topic was on. And then previously, we were talking about like learning all the different aspects of my topic. So, trans diagnostic was new to me. Working with low-income pregnant women was new. Designing an RCT, like it was a lot of reading and literature review, but I learned a lot, and I'm thankful for that.
That's very cool. Yeah. So you wrote this grant proposal, 10 pages. So that's also kind of a novel concept of writing something and bringing it to the exam. I haven't heard of that from anybody else who's done a comprehensive exam before. Often I hear things like, oh, it's a bunch of written examination stuff that's just questions you answer in a 3-hour time limit or something like that, or it's like an oral exam where you come in and they just ask you questions until you can't answer them anymore, but you actually had to prepare something beforehand and bring it in.
Yeah, I think I did prefer having a certain degree of preparation prior to the day of the actual exam. And that's because as I was reading and doing the literature review and writing the grant, questions pop up in your mind, right? It's like, oh, what about this concept? Or what about that? Or what about this methodology? And having that running list of questions was really helpful because I was able to refer to it and like kind of learn more about the literature. But also some of those questions that I had come up in my head were the very same questions that the committee members asked me. So I certainly think it was helpful in the prep, and it kind of forces you to prep. I think like with the grant, I had to do that systematic review of all studies that have been conducted in low-income women using some sort of psychological treatment. So yeah, certainly it helped me dive deep into the literature.
Mm-hmm. Did you come out the other end with any ideas of how you would change it based on the Q&A period? Did they convince you of anything or make you aware of anything that you didn't think of in your grant, or did you basically have an airtight grant?
No, definitely not the latter. No, I wish, but we're working towards that. Yeah, I think so. One thing that my committee really helped me with was kind of understanding, like helping me understand the statistical analyses I chose. Maybe choosing another type, especially because the one I proposed was a small pilot randomized control trial. So they're just giving me options of the different types of stats that I could have used rather than the one I proposed. And then the ultimate question was kind of like, because I was working with low-income women, it's kind of like this idea that, of course, they have other chronic stressors, right? Housing insecurity, food insecurity. And it's the question, is psychotherapy really going to fix that? You know, is psychotherapy going to house them and put food on the table? And the answer is no. These individuals need a living basic income. So it was interesting for me to, and that's something I was really interested in learning to begin with, was an unconditional basic income for low-income women. So it was interesting for me to kind of think about different ways that you can combine therapies, right? So maybe you can combine psychological treatment with case management for these women. So that's something at the back of my mind.
Yeah, that would definitely make for the kind of question and answer period that would be very daunting, I think, when you're, part of the whole idea of the study is that there are a ton of different aspects of the problem. Obviously, you can't know about every single aspect of it, but I guess you'd have to know the thing that you want to study exactly, and then maybe like have a little halo around it of related things, and then the grander picture where you know even a little bit less of it. But
yeah,
it does seem like a lot of stuff to prepare for. So
yeah, no, and that's a great way of describing it. And another thing that we have to remind ourselves is that they're not expecting us to be experts in this field after learning about it for just 2.5 months. And the questions that they asked really reflected that, and I was appreciative of that. And almost at sometimes it almost became a discussion, kind of like, oh, well, what do you think about this? Or if you were to do this in the future, what would you do? Kind of just testing your critical thinking skills. So I was appreciative of that. And also just throughout the entire process, I was just reminding myself, like, I can't be an expert in every single little thing, but I'll try.
Yeah, I guess that's what your collaborators are for.
Yeah.
I will defer this question to my imaginary collaborator, or my hypothetical collaborator. The other thing that was really different about yours compared to pretty much any other year is you probably did this over Zoom, right?
Yeah. I didn't notice any significant disadvantage aside from like, it would have been nice to see everybody in person and like get that congratulations in person, but there wasn't any significant disadvantage doing it over Zoom.
Okay. In preparing for all of this, did you do anything sneaky, like figure out a way to accidentally disconnect your microphone or something if you got stuck on a question? Was there any sort of...
That's good. Oh, these are the tips I needed, Adam. Why are you telling me this now? These are the tips I needed beforehand. I'm certain my internet naturally helped me out. I'm certain it cut in and out at some points, and here's hoping it cut out at the bad parts. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe we can get into the nitty gritty of preparing. So this is not like a typical test where, you sit down for 3 hours with a pencil and eraser and you write out stuff, and if you get it right, you get it right. If you don't, you don't. There's some amount of sort of discussion and back and forth, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So how did you go about preparing? Obviously, you had to prepare your document, but then presumably you had a bunch of time between finishing the document and actually going through this question and answer period. So what did you do?
Yeah. Yeah. So even preparing the document was a lot of back and forth, like a lot of writing and rewriting and editing. And my supervisor was really helpful in providing guidance on that and like providing like how RCT grants are written and, you know, things that should be included. And that was also a bit of a challenge, right? Because you think you have like a good draft and then you go back and there's just so much editing that's required. And you're kind of like just wondering like, okay, when am I going to get this off my plate so I can focus on the presentation and focus on some of the questions they might start asking me and preparing for those. So honestly, it was hard to balance that because part of me wanted to finish that grant like 4 weeks ahead of time, you know, but that did not happen.
Right.
Yeah, that did not happen. But I would say the prep happened simultaneously. So the prep for the writing the grant and editing the grant, and then also like preparing the PowerPoint presentation and thinking of those questions that they might ask, preparing the hidden slides. That was all happening at the same time. And part of me wish it didn't happen at the same time. You know, I kind of wanted like some breathing room at least, but that's just the way things panned out.
Stressful process for sure. How does it feel coming out of it? Do you feel like you are a better scientist? Do you feel like you sort of like passed a certain checkpoint, or how does it feel?
Yeah, all my committee members and supervisor were so kind. Even before I began, they were saying, well, this is such a great milestone that you're achieving. So that felt nice. And that really put it into context. The accomplishment that we do as PhD students to get to the stage. And yeah, in addition to being a sense of relief, I think I would say that it did make me a better scientist and a better researcher. Like we were talking earlier, when I was writing the grant, you know, you try to put yourself in the head of a reviewer. It's like, what kind of questions would they ask? How would they kind of like point out some of the limitations of your grant and what you can do to improve? And I did learn a couple of things. I learned that, number one, if you want to write a grant and be a researcher, do it in something that is your field of study rather than doing it in something that's completely unrelated. And I also learned the importance of collaboration. Because in our grant, we have to say the researchers that we would collaborate with, even though I didn't like reach out to them and email them, we still have to list some researchers, psychiatrists, whoever that we would want to invite on to the grant and research study. And that's really hard to do if you don't know the big names in your field or you haven't gone to conferences or networked. So I learned about the importance of collaboration and connecting with your fellow colleagues and remaining connected with them and kind of like keeping tabs on what everybody's doing. So I'm really thankful for like the reflections and the lessons learned that the process of doing the comps allowed me to do.
Okay. Okay. So keeping tabs on people in your network is something that you learned for sure. So leading up into the comprehensive season, what kind of rumors and things had you heard about it? What have you heard from other people? What were you kind of anticipating? Maybe myths or something that you could debunk, or something that, you know, surprised you about the process?
Yeah. So I had been hearing about the comms process. Well, Adam, I don't know about you, but to be honest, I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know the difference between a PhD student versus a PhD candidate until the first year of my PhD studies. Because 100% on the first day of grad school for my master's, I'm around here calling myself a master's candidate. You know what I mean? Like I didn't know the difference. And I feel like a lot of this is just like, you just casually hear it through your friends. It's not something that you're taught. So in terms of myths or rumors, I wouldn't say they're too juicy or delicious, but what I was hearing from some of my peers from other programs is I just always thought of it as such an intensive and burdensome process. And to an extent, it is. But you also have to remember that you are studying a field that you're very much interested, that hopefully you want to pursue as a future researcher. So you just have to keep that in mind and like keep on remembering, like, okay, this is going to benefit me a few years down the road. And like, hey, at least you're learning something. That's one of the reasons we're in grad school. We love to learn. Things that I guess calm me down a bit is because I was very nervous about this process, because it always seemed as this like elusive process that I didn't know that much about. And, you know, people always made like a really large deal about it. But when I talked to some of my lab members and some people in my program, not only did they provide me with helpful resources that kind of calmed me down, but they also said like, Sawayra, it's not too bad. Like, you know, like you're going to do great, you know, as long as you like make a timeline and kind of like sketch out your deadlines, like you'll do just fine. Like, you'll pass, you know, it'll be okay. So that was nice to kind of like hear it from people that made it out on the other end, especially people that are from your program who have done the exact same process. That was good. So initially I had like a very scary representation of it, but some of my colleagues helped kind of debunk that a little bit.
Yeah. I think I first started hearing about comprehensive exams in like the last year of my undergrad. I had a friend who sort of accelerated through his master's and was getting into a comprehensive exam situation. And him being the only person I knew in that level and talking about what was going on for his comprehensive exam, it seemed like it was almost more of a weeding out process than it actually is. I think that's maybe something that a misconception I brought with me. So this was at Western, and it was the physics department, and his comprehensive exam was drastically different from what mine ended up being at McMaster. His was a week of one test every day, like a sit-down written test, pass or fail. You never get to see your grade, but it was in all of the fundamental courses that you would take in a physics program. So it was like electromagnetics, quantum, classical mechanics, these sort of things. And I will say, from going through master's and PhD, I did a little bit of quantum in one semester and then never touched it again. And the idea of having to come back to all of that stuff in like we're going to weed you out kind of mentality was terrifying. And it actually like made me hesitant to want to do grad school at all, knowing that that was on the horizon. But I think exactly what you said, it's not as bad as it sounds. I guess I can't speak for every university. So maybe some of them do want to use it as a weeding out process, but at least from the people that I know going through it, it really just seems like it's a checkpoint. It's just you know, you had to do a bunch of courses, you've done a bunch of research. Let's just make sure that you have your bases covered, you know your field well enough. This is a time to catch up on any of the reading that you missed, or a little time to refresh your knowledge in certain topics, and we'll get through it, and then we'll go from there, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd like to think that your supervisor or your committee members wouldn't let you get to that point of a comprehensive exams without knowing that you are ready to start them and begin them. Because I don't think, anyone really wants to set you up to fail. So at least you'd hope not. But yeah. Oh, that's interesting to hear how, I guess, like how different universities kind of approach the comps and what they think of it.
Mm-hmm. I was doing a little bit of research coming into this, and I hinted at this in our pre-interview. But I guess comprehensive exams, or the concept of like a pass or fail checkpoint exam, isn't necessarily just a PhD thing. Other universities will do it in sometimes in undergrad, sometimes in masters. If it's like a course-based master's program where you're not going to be publishing a thesis, it's a little bit more common to have something a bit more intensive like this. But in this digging, I started coming across some weird aspects of comprehensive type exams. And this one that I came across that I want to bring up is an alumni from Yale. I think he said he graduated in the 60s or something like that. And I guess every person at Yale had to pass a swimming test. So you do your courses and everything. And I think what it said is when he first came to the university, to Yale, everybody from that cohort had to do a swim test. And if you failed the swim test initially, you'd go through several weeks of lessons.
Oh,
It wasn't like a very intensive swim test as far as like you're not going to be competing on the varsity team if you pass the swim test. It was
right.
I think 50 yards of continuous swimming, just of sort of one length of the pool and back again. But yeah, that sort of took the idea of comprehensive education and like took it to the logical conclusion of every possible thing you could possibly need as a human being to survive in this world. We're going to test you when you come to this university.
Yeah, I wonder why the emphasis on swimming. Why not some
Yeah.
other survival skill?
Mhm.
Let me tell you, I would not have passed. I would not have been a Yale
No?
student. No,
Uh-oh.
no.
You'd have to take your couple weeks of swim training.
Yeah.
So yeah, any tips you wish you could have told yourself going into it?
Yes, I guess a couple of things that I found helpful. So earlier I talked about the timeline. I found that really helpful just to sketch out, even if you don't end up following it, but just to sketch out your most optimistic dates that you want to complete each thing. So writing the grant, editing the grant, making the PowerPoint, prepping for questions. And also in that timeline, like allow leeway for life to happen, like days where you get sick or things that you need to tend to. I just found that helpful just to have that by my side to know like the goals to attend to throughout the process. Because especially like I was given maybe, I think 2.5 months to prep. And like, it's like, oh, writing a 10-page grant in 2.5 months, like that's fine. And you might just put it on the back burner a little bit. So having that timeline was just nice to refer to. Other things that I did. So I talked about having that running document of those questions that popped into my head. I'm certain that you've experienced it too. You're reading an article and it says something or it gives like a really interesting reference, and then you open that tab and that leads to another tab and you never end up finishing the original article. So it was nice just to have those questions in the back, like stored elsewhere, because on days where I didn't feel like working on the grant or it was just nice to go to these questions that were tangentially related to my topic, just to kind of research them and learn more about that. And another thing I did that I found really helpful is that I practiced my presentation with my peers. They gave some really helpful feedback, whether they had passed whether they had gotten to that stage or not. It was just nice to get an outsider perspective to see what I wasn't enough in detail or if I was glossing over anything. It's always nice when you present to your peers, and they ask some really helpful questions. So I recommend that to anybody who's embarking on this process.
Cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, congratulations. It is a really big milestone, and it does. It's good that you feel good coming out of it. Hopefully this sets the tone for the next couple months. Hopefully you continue feeling very accomplished after this. Ride the high if you can.
Yes, I am, Adam. I will.
Excellent. Yeah, any last minute things? I feel like we're getting kind of close to time.
No, I think you and I kind of tackled some of our similarities and differences during the comps process. And to anyone that's about to embark, I think good luck, study hard, do your best, and that's all you can ask for, and you will do great.
Yeah, keep that schedule. Even if you weren't a schedule person before, if you just get a little calendar, get something.
Yeah.
Get them sticky notes. I don't know. You'll survive.
You will. You will thrive.
You'll do great. Cool. Well, thanks so much for opening up and telling us about your journey. Yeah, I guess in the coming weeks, you'll be talking to some new grad students, so that's going to be exciting. You are a little bit more free now, so that's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to talk to you again.
Well, thanks as always, Adam, for interviewing me, for thinking of the idea, and for all that you're doing for the show. Hey,
my pleasure. Yeah, so that's it for this week. Of course, tune back in next week at Thursday at noon. We're there every week, so don't miss. Yeah, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks again to everybody for listening, and if you like the show and want to hear more, you can find us at scientificcanada.ca or any streaming app that you like.